What's up guys? Today we're going to be looking at how we can replace our camera setup with something that isn't completely terrible. I've gotten by with what we had up until now, but there's something I've been hiding from you. For one, since I can't manually control the angle of the camera, sometimes I just end up pointed into the sky, and then I either have to move my character around hoping I can get the camera to behave, or just close down the game and restart it. Also, the more I add to the game, the angrier the camera seems to become. I don't know why it's doing this, but it's not a great camera setup anyway, so we're just going to scrap the whole thing. And starting from scratch, I want to list out all of the behaviors that I want from the camera, and then look at what I need to do to get there. So point by point, my camera should be pointed at the player at around shoulder or head height. Allow the player to orbit the camera around the character while always remaining pointed at the character. Lag a little bit behind the character movement so that the camera doesn't appear to be locked to the player. And importantly for this game, the camera must remain upright with respect to the player when traveling around the planet, so that we don't end up with the camera upside down when we're on the South Pole. Taking an iterative approach to this, the first thing I want to get working is to just have the camera attached to the player so that I can move it around. Programming a camera to remain at a certain distance and orbit around the player given input would be really complicated and unnecessary. Instead, we'll just attach an object to the player, call it focus, and then attach the camera to the focus. Offset it by a distance, and now, when we rotate the focus, it has the effect of orbiting the camera around the player. Godot also has this spring arm node. If I attach the camera to the focus using a spring arm, I get things like adjusting to wall collisions for free. Then I just add a bit of an offset to the focus to bring the camera to around shoulder height. And now for the interesting bit. We don't want the camera to be completely anchored to the player. We want the player to be able to jump and move around a little bit before the camera begins to follow. The way I've implemented this before in 2D is to have a box around the player with the camera anchored to the box. The box doesn't move until the player hits the boundary. When it does, it pushes the box, dragging the camera along. And what we're going to do, we're going to just take this concept and expand it to 3D. We'll give a boundary width and height, effectively creating a cylinder around the player. We then attach the focus with the camera to the boundary. So now, the camera will orbit the focus on the boundary, which will get dragged around when the player moves too far in one direction and starts pushing against the walls. We're going to set the boundary as a child of the player, but in the script, we're going to detach it from the player when the game starts, because the boundary needs to be free-floating. The player and the boundary need to move independently from one another when the boundary is not being pushed against. Because the player is rotating in space as it moves around the spherical planet, we also set the rotation of the boundary to match the player on every frame. I also add two nodes that I'll call follow nodes, low and high. These will represent the player character within the boundary and will be what actually pushes the boundary around. These allow me to set independently how low or high the player needs to move within the boundary to start pushing against the ceiling or floor without having to change the actual size or shape of the player character itself. This is a huge improvement over what we've had until now, and it's starting to look like a character and camera setup that you would have in a normal game. However, I'm running into this issue. Unless the player already has a lot of momentum, you get stuck trying to go uphill, since the force being applied to the player is perpendicular to the ground, so it's pushing us into the hill. We want to fix that by changing the force direction to match the gradient of the hill, and that's what we'll be covering next time. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and be sure to hit the bell to be notified of future updates. Thanks for watching, I'm out.